What would you do if you were spiraling into a tunnel deep underwater with a whirlpool of water pushing you alongside 4 grown men with a couple of tanks through this frightening course, as you slowly lose consciousness, realizing it's inevitable that your life is going to be over in a couple of seconds? This is a tale that only one person out of the 5 was able to live to tell, the tale of the dreaded Pariah diving incident. The closest thing to evidence of what happened was a GoPro camera that was attached to the kit of one of the divers. The corresponding tale is one to send shivers through your exploring pants. Sit back and hold on tight as we pummel you through the Pariah incident. What seemed to be just a normal day for the employees of LMSC Pointe-à-Pierre, a diving company, on the 25th of February in the year 2022, turned out to be anything but. This company was contracted by Pariah Fuel, a government-owned oil company located in Trinidad and Tobago, to perform maintenance on one of their underwater pipelines. This was one of the specializations of Pointe-à-Pierre. 5 able and experienced divers were chosen for this task: Kazim Ali, Yusuf Henry, Rishi Nagasar, Faisal Kurban, and Chris Boudram. All highly skilled and efficient divers. They saw this as just another day at the office, not knowing that something dreadful was lurking in their near future. In this case, the group of 5 men would be working on a pipe that was not in use at that point. This pipeline was a U-shaped pipeline that consisted of 2 ends. One end that would enable the oil tanker to deposit its oil, and this particular place was called Berth 5. And the other end of the deal, where the deposited oil would pass through into the refinery, was called Berth 6. Undertaking this process meant that there would have to be a way to separate the ocean water from the part of the pipe where they needed to work. For that, they would need to place a habitat bell over the pipeline and then drain all the water out, enabling the divers to work efficiently on the pipe. The habitat was an 8x8 cube-like structure that was placed above the pipe. After air was blown inside the space created, the men could start their work as they would be able to stand on a platform. In this hyperbaric chamber, due to the absence of water and the presence of air, the group members could conveniently take off their swimming suits, enabling them to handle and work with tools better, achieving the goal and increasing efficiency. One of the tasks they had to complete was the removal of an inflatable plug all the way at Berth 6. This plug was installed about 2 weeks ago to protect the oil contents in the pipe and also to stop any hydrocarbon from escaping into the ocean. The plug was an airtight barrier that was preventing the high-pressure air from pushing down from the habitat chamber. Kazim Ali got a wrench to loosen the grip on the plug. He passed the wrench to the 4 men who were working around the pipe. As soon as he gave them the wrench, he immediately jumped down on the ledge and began removing his diving equipment. As soon as the valve was opened, an overwhelming force overtook the entire group, and the men lost control. Water rushed into the habitat and down into the pipe, sucking the men and their entire equipment into the pipe in a rapid tornado of water, throwing them every which way as they gasped for their lives. It was so unexpected and happened so fast that the men did not seem to understand what had just happened or what was even happening. In the course of this event, they were extremely lucky to pass through a point where there was at least a little pocket of space to breathe some air amid the extreme flush of oil and water. The short recording that was obtained from the GoPro camera showed only the men in the chamber, but immediately after the plug was pulled, everything went dark as the pressure intensified. Here is actual footage from the GoPro camera of the disastrous incident that happened. The not-so-funny irony of the entire matter was that the air that allowed them to breathe was the main reason for the waterborne tornado that brought them to this point. Now, what caused all this to happen? The plug they were removing was meant to be blocking about 1,200 barrels of oil from the air and all the ocean water around them. So, it would have been a matter of routine to just open the plug and continue with their work, as the pressure from the habitat would have been pressing against a balanced column of oil between Berth 5 and Berth 6. But the complication of this particular event was that there was a column of air under that plug and a little less oil in the pipe. As soon as they deflated the plug, the high-pressure air from the habitat rushed down into the pipe and sucked the divers with all their equipment as the pressure was released. Water filled the habitat and increased the pull strength into the pipeline, sucking them into that space that seemed to go on for eternity, until the whirling settled, and they eventually settled in a pocket of space where they could breathe. The lone survivor of the expedition, Chris Budrum, described the occurrence as a terrible and frightening experience. He thought he was already dead. He had given up on life as he couldn't see anything. Trying to open his eyes, all he could see was pitch black. Keeping them closed, all he could see was pitch darkness still. He felt extreme pain, terrible pain, he stated, as he was being flung side to side in the tunnel. On top of that, trying to hold his breath for that long period of time, his body started fighting. His lungs and airway rapidly closed. You could hear the noise of your body struggling to draw air, a really scary experience. Your throat burning, ears ringing, and your body so very sore. He recalled and clearly stated that he could not remember how he was sucked into the pipeline because the speed at which it all happened was overwhelming. All he could remember was being hurled into the pipeline. It was really scary.
Tornado, everything just spinning and beating you up, and it happened so fast. I couldn't react. The only thing I remember able to do was cover my head, like in the fetal position. After that, all I remember, I didn't even remember actually getting pulled in the pipe. I just remember getting pulled through the pipe at unbelievable speeds. I couldn't hold my breath no longer, man. Throat. When you're holding your breath for too long, after a while, your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you see a noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. You're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning. Your ears ringing. Your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was gonna dead.
Once the current had stopped throwing them around, the men were stationary, and they started assessing their environment and checking whether all 5 men were accounted for. None of them knew what had happened prior to the moment they were in now. After a short assessment, they concluded that they were inside the pipeline. It seemed unbelievable, but the awful reality was that they were there. They then tried to figure out where exactly they were in the pipeline, but it all seemed harder than it looked. At that point, they were disoriented and had no idea how far they had gone in the pipeline. The pipeline was about 1,200 feet in length, between berth 5 and berth 6. The pipeline had undulations at weld seams where there was support, but this variance in elevation allowed for air pockets to form. It was obvious that they were battered, but they had to think of the way forward. The entire pipe was coated with thick, slippery oil. The men were exhausted and confused as they couldn't decide which way to go, but eventually, they made a decision and started moving. It was really tough to navigate through the pipeline, as the slippery terrain was reducing their movement. Making it worse was the fact that most of them had broken bones and battered organs during the pull into the pipeline, alongside oil in their eyes and nostrils. All of this happening at once in complete darkness. The least injured diver at that point, Chris went ahead to place his feet on Kazim's shoulder, and then told Kazim to do same to the person under him and that. He then told Faisal to begin to thrust them forward, as he was the one behind them all, and they did this in unison and started moving forward. Moving through all that oil was really strenuous, but then they couldn't stop. They had to keep on moving, as they hoped to get to an end. Eventually, they spotted 2 oxygen tanks with the regulators still on them. He informed the others and told them to only take small sips of air, as the environment could make them really nauseous. After they were struggling for about an hour, they were then faced with a new problem. As they moved further, the person in the very front noticed that his head was almost touching the edge of the pipeline, as the space between the end of the pipeline and the seawater was just about 6 inches. As the seawater level was rising, they would have to swim through the oil to get to another region where there would be air pockets. Some of them were very hurt and couldn't continue as they had severely damaged some organs of their body. As they moved forward, Chris noticed that the next area was completely covered with water. It became a very frightening task for him. The first thing that came to his mind was that he could take one of the tanks, swim out, and then get help for the rest of his crew. He pointed this out to them, and they all agreed, with Chris promising to come back with help immediately. He quickly progressed with no real idea if he was going in the right direction or not, and also not knowing if he had enough air to proceed. As a diver, he took a long gulp and then held his breath, hoping to at least see another air pocket. As if fate was working for him, he hit a metallic object along the way and found out it was another tank. He struggled to find the regulator, but didn't find it, so he just shoved everything into his mouth. Eventually, he found another air pocket and then came across another tank. This place was the last flooded section before the bend in the pipe, either the zone at which they came from, or if he was wrong, he'd be heading to berth 5, which was still sealed off with the plug. If he was right, he'd be coming through where they got sucked in eventually. In a moment, he could hear someone call out his name. As he turned, it was Faisal, who asked Chris to wait up. Chris told him he couldn't, as time was literally running out. With the very last push of determination, he made up his mind to come all the way out of this, regardless of how tired he was feeling. He was determined to save his team and come out of there, in spite of all the oil burning his eyes. He eventually made it out. Even though he survived the ordeal, it wasn't over yet, as his mates were still stuck inside. As he recounted the ordeal and what had happened, describing every detail, it was so sad that the LMCS could not agree with Christopher's story. The company assumed that the pipeline was full of oil, and that any oxygen tank they had would only provide them with at least an hour of air each. As rescue divers went down to uncover the location of the trapped individuals, they received a satisfying knockback as they knocked on the pipe to confirm if someone was there. It gave the trapped men hope, but the LMCS team still hadn't figured out a way to get them out. Hours had passed since they were trapped. These 4 injured divers had to survive through the excruciating pain of their injuries, the dwindling air, the field of suffocating air fumes, rising sea level, and then carbon dioxide. Although it seemed that the LMCS and the Pariah company would save them, a rescue never came, and these men lost their lives there. Their bodies were pulled out some days after the incident happened. The death of his fellow divers really broke Chris as he told the Commission of Inquiry that the officials of Trinidad and Tobago launched to find out the circumstances surrounding the tragedy that befell these divers. Chris told the Commission of Inquiry that he thought they were trying to rescue him, and that he thought attempts were being made to rescue his fellow divers, but nothing of the sort was happening before breaking down in tears. There is a lot of debate on the decision by the oil company and the Coast Guard not to attempt a rescue, as the men were not far from 100 feet from their safety, and a rescue was very well possible, but they chose not to and left these men to their peril. Many diving incidents are notable among others, but few are on the level of this Pariah diving incident.